1971 to 1983, Judge Batchelder served as an attorney in private practice with Williams and Batchelder in Medina, Ohio. She obtained her first judicial post as a judge on the U.S. Bankruptcy Court for the Northern District of Ohio in 1983. After 2 years, she was appointed by President Ronald Reagan to the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Ohio. While a district judge, Batchelder earned a Master of Laws degree from the University of Virginia School of Law in 1988. In 1991, President George Bush appointed her to her position as judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, which covers Ohio, Michigan, Kentucky, and Tennessee. From August 2009 to August of 2014, Judge Batchelder served as Chief Judge of the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. She did not include in this that she also served as a judge for the Lyceum Poetry Out Loud Contest. Batchelder received her BA from Ohio Wesleyan University and her JD from the University of Akron School of Law. She is on the Board of Trustees of Grove City College, for which she received an honorary Doctorate of Law in 2009. She has been honored with several awards from the University of Akron and the University of Akron School of Law, the Law Outstanding Alumni Award in 1993, an Honorary Alumni Award in 1996, an Honorary Degree of Doctor of Law in 2001, and in 2013, an Honorary Doctor of Humane Letters. In 1993, she received the Honorary Doctor of Laws degree from Lake Erie College. In 2011, Judge Batchelder received the Defender of the Constitution Award from the Heritage Foundation. In 2016, she was honored with the Claremont Institute's Ronald Reagan Jurisprudence Award. Most recently, in May of 2018, she was presented with the Sir Thomas More Award from the Catholic Diocese of Cleveland in conjunction with the Akron Bar Association. She was married for 55 years to her beloved husband, the late William G. Batchelder III, longtime Ohio legislator and former Speaker of the Ohio House of Representatives. She makes no effort to be objective about her two wonderful adult children and their wonderful spouses and her 8 grandchildren, whom she adores and with whom she enjoys spending more time since taking her senior status. Welcome, Judge Batchelder. We're delighted to have you.
So if I can't get through this, my beautiful daughter will come up and sub for me. She promised. It's both a privilege and a pleasure to be introducing the featured speaker this evening. I've long been of the view that this kind of an introduction ought not to repeat what every one of you can read in your program, and I would urge you to read what is in your program. Because if I tried to go through all of that, we would be here until morning, and we'd really rather hear from Alan. So I'm going to focus on just one of the reasons that Alan Sears is one of the most important people in the United States today, and I suspect that he'll be a little bit surprised by that description. A number of years after launching the Alliance Defending Freedom, which is one of the foremost organizations devoted to defending and preventing further erosion of religious freedom in this country, Allen instituted the Blackstone Legal Fellowship Program. Blackstone has, since the year 2000, been engaged in teaching law students how to practice their profession in a manner consistent with the teachings of the Bible. In fact, I would venture to say that the Blackstone students learn how to survive in their profession while staying faithful. I know firsthand what is taught in this program because I've attended some or all of the program for upwards of 15 years. My participation in each of those years has been to address the students on my assigned topic of a faithful faith in a secular profession. I have seen the strength and depth of the training, and I have personally benefited from it because I've been blessed to have a lot of Blackstones, I've lost count of the actual number, working in my chambers as law clerks. And Alan says, and I think he's right, that I still carry the title of being the federal judge with the most Blackstone clerks. Several years ago, I asked Alan why the Blackstone program included so many students from the elite law schools when there are innumerable terrific students in the non-elite schools who could benefit greatly from the program. His response was that he was increasing the overall size of the class each year in order to bring in more students from all levels of schools, and that whether we like it or not, having the elite law schools on their resumes helps students get the positions for which Blackstone is preparing them. And then he said, "My goal, Alice, is to infiltrate the government." Blackstone has. As your program tells you, you will find Blackstone Fellows now serving as judges and judicial clerks and working with members of Congress and in governmental agencies. Nor is it only in government that the Blackstone Fellows are infiltrating. You will find them also engaging in the practice of law, participating in academia, and much more. And focusing on Blackstone could not be more timely. I know for certain that no Blackstone Fellow would, indeed could, leak a draft opinion from the Supreme Court, or for that matter, from any court. We need these. Alan Sears has spent his life defending religious freedom and freedom of speech, both in court and out of court, and helping so many others learn how to do the same, and doing it all to the glory of God. Some 15 years ago, when Alan first asked me to speak to the Blackstone students, neither he nor I had any idea the impact that Blackstone would have on my life. He probably doesn't know now, but I do. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce to you one of our Lord's true lawyers in the defense of freedom, Alan Sears.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Your Honor. It's always very difficult when you're a lawyer to refer to a judge any other way than those. But most of all, I would just say this dear woman has become a dear friend, not just to me, but to literally hundreds of young lawyers across this country who now have hope that they can live their life and practice their calling and their profession in a way that is consistent with their faith and with their love for the Lord. So thank you so much, Judge Reginald, for those very, very kind words. I want to thank you also, Luke Mason, for inviting me. And I'm so honored to be at the table and be here with the clergy, with the bishops, with the pastor of this wonderful church. When Paul and I drove in this evening, we saw the light on the domes of the church, and we said, the Holy Spirit is here. It's just so amazing. And we, particularly at this time, ask our Lord to pray, to lift up the people of Ukraine. Our prayers are with you. And maybe that light on your domes is a sign of His love, His everlasting, never-ending love for the people of Ukraine. Thanks be to God. Well, it is a great honor, as I say, to be here at this grand spring gala for the Lyceum, and with the singing, with that incredible choir, your student body, and the achievements, seeing in your program, you rank number 8, number 10 in some of the classical standardized testing. They tell us a little bit about how wonderfully different is the Lyceum. And the contrast could not be greater as you focus on a classical Catholic education. And we all wish other schools would follow your example. If they did, we would not read, as we did in the Wall Street Journal just a few days ago, about the Boston school system. It said that the Boston school system is now steaming with a fervor for social justice. But one thing there has not changed. They still do a very poor job of educating the children, especially the majority who are Hispanic and Black. Thanks to its universities, Boston brims with educational talent and good intentions. But the $1.3 billion Boston public school budget keeps expanding, even while the student population shrinks, the standardized testing goes down, and the money simply buys failure. How tragic. As you know here tonight, it's not about the money of the public taxpayer. It's about content. It's about dedication to the true, the good, and the beautiful. And as Judge Batchelor said, we know that classically educated people know about integrity and don't leak SCOTUS opinions and other documents. On another note, as I served a number of years on the school board overseeing the Diocese of Phoenix 35 Catholic schools, our faithful bishop often visited the schools, and he particularly liked to go to the kindergarten or the early grades of the schools. And one of my favorite little stories the bishop told me was about when he visited a kindergarten art class. And he went into the art class, and as you know, kindergartners have varying talents. And he was watching one little girl draw something very intimate, and he sees the expression on her face, and he knows that this is something special for her. So he comes over, and he says, young lady, that's just, it looks like it might become lovely, but I frankly just don't know what it is. And she said, oh, Bishop, I'm drawing a picture of God. And the bishop very politely says, oh, that's very kind, but nobody knows what God looks like. And she said, oh, Bishop, just wait. When I get my drawing done, you can show it. Everybody else will know what God looks like. And as a citizen, and as a lawyer involved in public policy, in all kinds of cases, litigation, different things over 50 years, all too often, we've had to step into the fray to defend the oppressed, the discriminated against, and the mistreated. And all too often, as we've appeared in courts and other places, trying to uphold the rights of our clients under natural and civil law under the Constitution, all too often, the experience waiting for the judge to rule, not this judge, but many other judges, is like waiting for that little girl's drawing to be done. Because we don't know what our rights are and what our Constitution looks like until they get done with the drawing. And that is not the way it's supposed to be. When our nation's founders, many of whom were classically educated, wrote the Constitution and wrote the Bill of Rights and wrote our early laws, those founders used very specific words that had very specific meanings that they wanted to be applied at that time and at all times with a very precise and definite meaning. There was not supposed to be a mystery about what was contained in the Constitution. And that legal framework, those words were to protect the rule of law, religious liberty, private property, free and competitive markets, and limited government, including what we know as subsidiarity, which meant that no central authority should do what could be done by a local body better, and no public institution should be doing what could be left to private enterprise. That framework and those words drove vast advances on every front, gave us great freedoms, and lifted living standards to heights unimaginable at our nation's founding. This granted us a glorious future as a nation, and tonight it gives us a glorious past. But more than on anything, the founders were not concerned just with themselves. They were concerned with the future. They wanted every American, in every age and time, to share in their vision of a glorious future built upon a proud past. They wanted what Abraham Lincoln reminded us of in the darkest days of 1861, that the struggle of today is not altogether for today. It is for a vast future also. We also know when the Congress wrote the Bill of Rights, especially the First Amendment, it was not to grant us new rights. It was to protect the inalienable rights that were granted to us by God, based upon our dignity as human persons, and these things will be protected from the government and not trampled on by our leaders. Unlike those living under tyrannies and monarchs, our founders prescribed certainty. We were not supposed to wait, as I say, for the judges to finish their drawings before we understood the text or knew what our rights would look like at any time or year. But because the most essential purpose of our Constitution to protect our liberty has been forgotten or distorted by those without classical educations, Luke, or with very little understanding of the past, scores of our Catholic and Christian brothers and sisters have had to stand and engage in many harsh and difficult legal battles to protect our liberty and the principles upon which it is based. And those principles are not child's or judge's drawings either. As noted by Pope Benedict, these principles are inscribed in human nature itself to all people prescinding from any religious affiliation. What I want to do for a few moments is discuss some of our history that is lost to most. Probably these students that sing so beautifully on the stage have heard some of these stories I'm going to talk about, but many others have not. And in telling these stories of our past, I want to remind us of the greatness of that time and encourage you about how glorious our future can be. If the Lyceum, and those who aspire to be like you, Luke, succeed in educating our future generations. I'm not suggesting things will be easy, because we are in a historic struggle. This school is in a historic struggle over your very ability to exist, to be able to hire and have people of faith that agree with you in the school. But today, as people of faith, as Catholics, as other Christians, we must always remember the incredible legacy that Catholics have of overcoming threats and persecution when we stand together in our faith. Tonight, as Catholics and Christians discussing those defending liberty, marriage, even the concept of male and female and the right of conscience, let us recall that just 250 years ago, it was unlawful to celebrate the Holy Mass across the entire British Empire. It was forbidden in the American colonies except in Pennsylvania. And when the French surrendered what was called the Ohio Country to the British, the Mass was illegal where we celebrate this school tonight. It seems inconceivable today. The Catholic priests in what's now the United States and Canada were not permitted to publicly consecrate or dispense the bread of life, and the punishment for doing so could be dire. During that era, anti-Catholic sentiment was such, for example, in the colony of Maryland, that the sons of even the wealthiest, most successful planters had limited liberties. They could not hold office, they could not vote, they could not practice law. And many of those families had to send their children elsewhere for education. Many of them sent their children to pre-revolutionary France for a solid classical education. Several of the families chose St. Omer's, which later, after the Catholic Relief Act of 1791, that school migrated to England, where it became known and is still there today as Stonyhurst College. Not incidentally, during that time of deadly persecution, St. Omer's produced 3 saints, 12 beati, and 22 martyrs. As a footnote, and a little later, shall we say, more pleasant age, another young American Catholic named George Herbert Walker was educated there at Stonyhurst. His grandson and great-grandson became the 41st and 43rd presidents of the United States. What did those young American Catholic men from the colonies, what did they study at St. Omer's? They were surrounded while they were there by the memories of the martyrs and the discussion of all the things that were going on to persecute the faith. Those young men studied what the Lyceum now offers. They received a classical Catholic education. They studied the great works of mathematics, science, history, literature, philosophy, and theology, using the Socratic method. They were challenged to become lifelong learners in a joyful pursuit of the truth, of course, who is Christ. My wife Paula and I have been very blessed to stand in the archives and the shelves of Stonyhurst College and hold in our hands the very essays and schoolwork, including doodles, of some of these great American sons. Their education at the classical school formed them into young people who could think for themselves, and taught them it was not about them, and taught them that they were to engage in lives of service. And when 3 of these American sons, who because of bigotry were sent across the seas, returned home to our American shores, they did what they were taught. They applied their classical learning. They did not sit in silence on the sidelines. They engaged. And their education enabled them each to be able to interact well and often overcome the prejudice of their fellow colonists of other faith. And each of these 3 played major roles in shaping what would become this nation, its laws, and its constitution. Charles Carroll, who eventually took over his family's enterprises, became an early advocate of independence for the Kingdom of Great Britain. Because of his classical education, his extensive works and writings, his ability to debate and communicate with anyone and everyone, despite his disfavored religion, he was sent to Congress in Philadelphia. And there he was made a congressional delegate to French Canada. He was so effective in his dealings with the French that he was elected a member of the Second Continental Congress. And as such, he became the only Roman Catholic to sign the Declaration of Independence. As a full citizen of the then new republic, he helped write the Maryland State Constitution, was elected to both the State Senate and the United States Senate, and at his death in 1832 was the last surviving signatory of the Declaration. His cousin Daniel helped the framers of the United States Constitution to more fully understand the issues of religious freedom and rights of conscience. And he was only one of 5 persons and the only Catholic to sign both the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. Daniel served in the first session of the United States Congress, which wrote and enacted the Bill of Rights, including the First Amendment. He was a strong supporter of business partner George Washington. He was one of the 3 surveyors of Washington City. He became what we would now call co-mayor of Washington. And he, among many other things, provided the land that the United States Capitol now sits in Washington. Not bad for a school in France. Daniel Carroll's brother John, in 1790, became the first Roman Catholic bishop in America. His diocese of Baltimore was the entire United States of America. John founded the first diocesan parish, as well as Georgetown, the country's first and oldest Catholic college. In 1791, he wrote this: He wrote a prayer to put the United States in God's hands. The prayer has been repeated many times during national peril and at presidential inaugurations. Most recently, I recall it being read during the 9/11 crisis. A short portion of this prayer is relevant to us all tonight. We pray, O God of might, wisdom, and justice, through whom authority is rightly administered, laws are enacted, and judgment decreed. Assist with your Holy Spirit of counsel and fortitude the President of these United States, that his administration may be conducted in righteousness, by encouraging due respect for virtue and religion, by a faithful execution of the laws in justice and mercy, and by restraining vice and immorality. Let the light of your divine wisdom direct the deliberations of Congress and shine forth in all of the proceedings and laws framed for our ruling government. That's the impact of just 3 classically educated young men. In great part, much of the wonderful freedom this country has had in subsequent years was a result of their great work. And as Catholics and people of faith, as 2,000 years of history, which produced the Litany of Saints demonstrates, is the early American Carroll family legacy demonstrates, empowered by the Eucharist and persevering, we can change the world, we can provide what the world needs with those things that the Lyceum offers. To get there, we know what the Lyceum is giving, and we need more. Classical education that nourishes and sustains Western civilization, what sustained our great scientists, statesmen, philosophers throughout history. The Lyceum graduates who study the great works. We need well-formed young people like the Carrolls who can think for themselves and answer the call to engage, and citizens who are lifelong learners. It was that education and that preparation that laid the foundation for this great country. And I want to close my time with you by telling you a little story that's kind of personal about three of my children. Paul and I had 3 children who, we live in Arizona. This is really weird. The 3 of our children decided to go to New York to college. Somebody said, well, it's as far as they could get and still be in the United States, away from mommy and daddy. No. And they all stayed there for a number of years. But while they were there, their parish church, for most of the time they were there, was the old St. Patrick's Cathedral, which some of you may know in Soho. The original St. Patrick's, courageously built in 1809 with the nickels and dimes donated by the hardworking immigrant families. And I say it was courageous because a Catholic cathedral was not welcome in New York in 1809. But build they did. And they built what was then the largest church in the city. It stands south of Houston Street this evening. And also, there is an old wall, a very thick and a very solid wall, a very high wall that completely surrounds the church. It looks odd in that neighborhood today, but the wall was not designed for style. It was built to protect the church and its parishioners, to keep the rotting fruit and the rocks that were hurled from the street by those who disdained Catholics from being hit or breaking the stained glass. The wall allowed the parishioners to worship safely and in relative peace, to receive from their pastors some of the classical education and formation which we've spoken of. But like the Carrolls, the parishioners of Old St. Paul's just did not stay inside the church or keep what they learned to themselves. They did not just cower and hide behind their walls. They went into their church to learn, to gather strength, to hear the gospel, to receive the bread of life. And then they left the protection of those walls, and they engaged. They engaged in the public square vitally. They became saints, priests, teachers, grocers, police officers, city council members, mayors, governors, members of the Congress. They built factories and businesses that provided prosperity for millions. They built a great city and a great nation, which became known as a refuge across the globe for others seeking the light of freedom, as the Ukrainian people are tonight. Out in the public square, these Catholics with their fellow citizens changed the world. And in 1879, they opened the doors of the new St. Patrick's Cathedral, the cathedral we all proudly know today. The new church, in gleaming white marble, was then the tallest structure in New York City, and it was the second highest building in the United States. It remains today the largest cathedral in North America. And from there, Catholics proclaimed the presence of Christ on Fifth Avenue at the center of the world's most public of all squares. And they continued to long, to build, and to contribute. They became soldiers and sailors and generously fought for the liberty of others across the globe, from Gettysburg to Belleau Wood, from the windswept cliffs of Normandy to the Isles of the Pacific. That is our legacy, your legacy as Catholics, our heritage, your heritage. So famous and compelling was that unique American freedom that Catholics had so much to do with winning and keeping, that in 1886, our friends from across the waters in France donated to the New Yorkers and the nation the image of a lady holding a lighted torch and tablet. The tablet bearing the date 1776, the year of the Declaration of Independence. That declaration that the well-formed, classically trained Catholic Charles Carroll had signed. Around the lady's feet are broken chains, celebrating the end of slavery and victory in the Civil War. Lady Liberty, the Statue of Liberty, served as a marker in the harbor for millions of those who came seeking that freedom. And still she stands with her light tonight and cries she was silent. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Send those tempests tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. This history, this good news, is your legacy as a follower of Christ, demonstrating the power of the sacraments and faith in the public square. And this is what the litany of saints throughout the roll call of history cry out for us to remember, and cry out for us to prepare our youth, to educate our next generation, as the Lyceum so aptly seeks to do, to prepare them to boldly engage in the voting booths, the courthouses, the legislatures, joining that roll call of history, joining that lady in the New York harbor, and lifting the torch of freedom. And by the way, one final word on Lady Liberty. She's not standing still. She lifts her right foot as she marches forward to preserve freedom, even freedom for our church and to live our faith. Because those who forged her, those who mounted her in that windy harbor, knew that our freedom is never assured, that we either engage in the square to renew and protect it, to prepare our next generations, or we surrender and lose it. So let us go forth this eve, taking our rightful places in that square, recalling that without Christ we can do nothing, but through him we can accomplish all that he calls us to do. Let us commit to defend, protect, and preserve life, conscience, marriage, and liberty. To defend those truths, these clear principles, and not wait for the drawing to be done, to know what's left of our rights and freedoms. And in so doing, let's stand with the Lyceum. I don't care how generous you've been, this is a dangerous thing to say, Lou. You could probably be more generous. Because you saw standing on the stage young men and women who were prepared to become your future and your legacy. And in so doing, let's thank our God for our nation, for our faith's glorious past, for our nation's glorious past, and thank him that on our knees we will have an even more glorious future before us. And in so doing, may our good and gracious Lord bless the Lyceum, bless its students and teachers, bless its donors and patrons, and may the good Lord bless and protect us and our families, and may he bless our much troubled nation with his grace to have a glorious future. Thank you very much.